Welcome to the Recess Life Podcast. This is the place where we explore play and what it means to get back to your inner child. I'm Louise, your host. Join me as I chat with teachers, entrepreneurs, artists, and thought leaders about how we can live a life of more play and impact. Let's get it started. Hello, Recess Life listeners. Welcome back to the podcast. I hope this finds you well wherever you are. I am enjoying a sunny weekend here in San Francisco. Last weekend, I actually went camping, which felt really bizarre but amazing to do. I went with a few friends about 3 hours away from San Francisco. We each had our own tent and brought our own food and tried to socially distance as best as we could and wear masks if we were too close to each other or walking past other people. There were a lot of people at the campground. I think everyone just wants to get away as much as possible. Lots of families. We went hiking. We floated in a river and enjoyed camping things. It was really nice. So I'm feeling rather refreshed from that weekend, and this last week felt really creatively inspired. I made a TikTok video about some racist history I learned about specifically in Southern California. It's a piece of history that happened in Manhattan Beach in Southern California. It was about a family that built an all-black resort in Manhattan Beach in the 1920s. And the really tragic history of that family getting run off the land and their lodge getting revoked, and pretty much all African Americans were demanded to leave the area, and how sad that is. So I made this video sharing just what I had learned, and it has since kind of gone viral on TikTok, and it's been so bizarre because I did not expect that at all. Last time I checked, I had 7,000 plus new followers on TikTok, and I actually shut TikTok down for the weekend so that I would just stop noticing the notifications and comments that were coming in. So I don't know what my follower or like count is at this point, and frankly, I don't want to focus on that. But it did inspire me to just keep creating and to keep learning and sharing what I'm learning, whether that's around play, creativity, racism, history. I just hope to be able to share knowledge and in a way that it helps other people. So it's been a really interesting, bizarre week coming off of that camping trip. And then, of course, releasing part 1 of the conversation with Alison Calhoun. You are about to hear part 2. In case you needed a refresher, a few weeks ago, I came across a Facebook post written by Alison. Alison is my former high school Bible study leader, and the post really rattled me. And I decided to reach out to her and to have a conversation to understand where she was coming from in this post. And I'm just going to read it again just so it's fresh in your mind. When you stand up for something you believe in and people don't like it, you've officially detached yourself from the chains of approval. Feels darn good. Keeping abortion clinics open as an essential business during a pandemic that threatens the lives of the vulnerable is the biggest double standard on the face of this planet. Please don't tell me this shutdown is a good idea because it saves lives, but then fund the killing of unborn babies. Parentheses, yes, I realize you can't catch an abortion, but you darn well can support it, making it a pandemic. You've lost my trust. You've lost credibility. You've raised many eyebrows as to what the agenda is behind this virus. This is why I have not and will not trust your numbers and the rigging of them. Good day. Parentheses, insert an image of me skipping away. So the first part of the conversation, which is the episode previous to this, I sat down with Alison to really build a foundation and to work up to understanding this post. In part 1 of the conversation, we started with some fun play-based games, Really, this is just a fancy way to say icebreaker. I really wanted to make sure we started the conversation in a really fun, playful, light way because we were going to potentially enter into some challenging topics. So I wanted to work up to the intensity by starting off with something very light. I didn't want us to feel like we were entering in right away against each other, and I wanted to build trust between us. We reintroduced ourselves to each other because we haven't really had contact in about 20 years. So we were reintroducing ourselves to each other like we would be if we were strangers. We reminisced about the time she was my Bible study leader and our favorite memories from that time we shared together, who we were during that time. We also caught up on what our lives look like today. So what are the accomplishments that have gotten us to where our lives are today? What we currently believe about Christianity and our faith. I shared that I no longer identify as a Christian, and she shared that she is more confident than ever in her Christian faith. Part one of the conversation was really laying the foundation down and to really understand and humanize each other so that we could really have an open and honest conversation. Part one of the conversation was really about creating trust between us and about understanding who the other person is. Hopefully that part of the conversation gave you a good idea of where we are both coming from in approaching this conversation. It's really clear that her Christian faith is super important to her. So as you will hear in this next part, it really informs where she stands around coronavirus and what she believes to be true. As you will recall in part one of the conversation, it wasn't my intention to have an argument about who was right and to put each other down in any way. It was really my intention to just understand where she was coming from. After reading her post, I had felt emotionally charged and I wanted to reconcile where these feelings were coming from. In part two, we are going to talk about our beliefs around coronavirus and what led her to write this post and where her beliefs come from. I will also share what I believe to be true about coronavirus based on my own understandings and the information that I am reading. At the end of the episode, I will share more about my reflections on the conversation, what I learned, how I really feel transformed truly through this whole experience, and what I'm going to take away into conversations moving forward. I will share more about what I learned in the process of having this conversation with Alison and what I hope to implement in my life moving forward. And maybe it could help you too the next time you come across someone that you share a difference of perspective with. I'll talk more about how I think this relates to play and how this could inform some of the work I do moving forward. I'll share more about the preparation that went into getting ready for the conversation and how a lot of that went out the window as soon as we started talking about coronavirus. I'll also share more about what I would have done differently. The conversation went really well, but there are a few things that I would have changed and things that I want to learn and grow and expand upon. So make sure you stay until the end of the conversation because I will dive into all of that. Once again, I want to thank the people that I chatted with to help me prepare for this conversation. Jeff Harry from Rediscover Your Play, John Durso, who is on the board of an organization called Bridging Our Divide, Connor Moore, he is the creator and host of several podcasts, Okay Babe, The Realness, and The Condor Wanders Experience, Gary Hirsch from On Your Feet, and I forgot her last time, but Dr. Shoshana Ungerleider. Dr. Ungerleider is the founder of the Endwell Project and the Endwell Foundation, and she's also an internal medicine doctor at Crossover Health in San Francisco. She has spoken to CNN, Fox, and MSN about She has appeared on CNN, Fox, and MSN to speak about coronavirus, and so I'm super grateful that she shared some information with me before I had my conversation with Alison. And also to a few personal friends, Zach Clark, Matt Shar, Helen Wu, Esther O. Thank you so much, all of you, for helping me prepare for this conversation. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Alison Calhoun. I will see you on the other side. Let's go to the last section, life in the time of COVID-19. The biggest shift to my life has been the slowed down pace of my life from work screeching to a stop. And the biggest challenge I've experienced is the grappling of uncertainty for what my career looks like, and in general, having the space to sit with my emotions. An unexpected lesson has been, for myself, there is always a way to be purposeful and learning and growing even outside of what I know to be normal, quote unquote. And having control is a myth. My biggest fear is that on an individual level, we will lose out on the personal opportunities that we could have during this time. So this is a weird time. Like, when are we ever going to get a pause like this again? And what are we going to do with this opportunity? And I'm worried that even for myself and others, that what we could use as a gift, that we're going to use it to... I have friends that are putting everything on hold in their life, or they are watching Netflix all day and that's it. And sure, this is not an ideal circumstances, but what could we do at this time? And I'm afraid that I and others will be sad about what they lost out on and what they could have done during this time. So there's that. And on a big picture scale, my biggest fear is that I feel like in the beginning of all of this, the first couple weeks or so, there was a lot of solidarity and a lot of uniting together over the whole world going through this, and we're all in this together. And I could hardly get a volunteer shift at the food pantry because people were just volunteering like crazy, giving back, and you couldn't get a slot to donate blood because all those slots were filled up. People were just so like, let's support each other, let's be there for each other. And it felt like we were all coming together in solidarity. But I'm afraid now that we're becoming a little bit more fractured in the way we're all approaching this. And there's starting to be different conversations, and that I don't want us to lose out on, let's be there for each other. Let's support each other and let's get through this. Yes, this is hard. That's my fear. And I'm afraid that it will have long-term consequences in that capacity. Yeah. My dreams for myself have changed in this way since COVID. So for me, this time has really put a pause on everything. I was really running my life at 100 miles per hour before this I was traveling constantly. I always had another project or another client that I was working on and traveling internationally. I was in Thailand and Uganda back to back in February. Like, that was my life. Wow. And then when I was home, it was like frantically trying to catch up with friends and making sure I'm working on my podcast and, keeping busy with my life and working out, and my life, I was always on to the next thing. Mm-hmm. And with this time, it's really caused me to stop and pause and be like, okay, was running at that speed really sustainable in the long run? Is that what I want for my life? And how do I want to reimagine what life may look like after this? Right. It's really sort of reinforced, I think, a lot of the things I really wanted to explore and that I didn't give myself time to explore before this. And that is a lot around creativity. So I think the mission of what I want to do with my podcast, I don't know where it's going to go, but this message that I really want to drive, I really see myself doing more around that. And I don't know what that looks like, but I'm really enjoying the space to explore that right now in a way that I never really could have before. So I think it's just sort of really reinforced the idea and the reminder that you don't got control over much. So partly why I started my business was because I wanted control. I wanted to be able to choose my life. I wanted to be able to choose the clients I work with. And I wanted the control. I didn't want any one entity to be able to tell me, oh, you can't work or whatever. Right. But then this happens, right? And it's like, I never had that control to begin with anyway. That was always a myth.
Right.
I think it's going to drive me towards something else. So
yeah.
I want to hear your responses.
Yeah. Okay. I said, okay. So the biggest shift in my life since COVID has been not being with my community. I mean, again, like being a stay-at-home mom and I've been able to pretty much do everything except that. The biggest challenge I've experienced is hearing all the different conflicting information around this virus and watching people judge others for not believing the same as they do. It's been challenging. An unexpected lesson has been that it is important and okay to question everything, search for truth. So I wasn't expecting to see the importance of that come to like the forefront like it has, that it's just important and okay to question everything you're hearing and being told. My biggest fear is how the response to this virus will affect our future freedom. My dreams for myself / the world have how they've changed since COVID is that it really hasn't. I want myself and the world to hold on to Jesus more than ever. That's always been my dream for myself and others. I just feel like it's our lifesaver. I just do in this crazy Lord of the Rings world. If anything, I'm like, oh man, I want that more.
Where to unpack first.
I know, right?
Yeah. What has been your experience of the disagreeing that you'd mentioned around COVID?
Well, there's just different media news outlets, different things floating around on Google and different perspectives, different comfort levels. There's so many variables. I think one thing that's hard is what we're hearing about face masks. Do you wear them? Do you not? Do you wear them even if you don't believe that they add any protection, but just wear it out of solidarity? But if you're not wearing face masks, are we asking people why? Like, not in a judgmental way, but like, why don't you wear a face mask? What if somebody believes that it's actually hard on their health, and that's just a consideration that they have to take. Like, I put it on and I pass out, and I'm conscious in all the other ways to not come close to people if they're visibly, so there's the face mask conversation. There's the, how do we feel about getting contact tracing being in place? How do we feel about how long, what originally seemed to just be a let's quarantine, and everybody was like all in, let's just see what happens. And I'm not going to say I was like, man, this stinks, but what's what we have to do. And then after that, it was like, okay, you can go out, but you've got to no larger groups than whatever. The numbers kept changing, like 10. And at first we're hearing, don't wear a face mask, leave those for the, hospitals. You don't need to wear them. They're not really that effective. You got to wear these anytime you go out. Like, there's going to be stores that say you can't come in if you're not wearing one. Just the information just seems like it keeps changing. And so that's a little bit difficult for me because I think that I can see people visibly afraid of each other. And I think that's what I'm the most sad about. I'm like, people are afraid. They're afraid of people. They're afraid to leave their home. And I do think that this is true. I do think that when you create fear, you can create control. It's funny because we've been talking about fear and control in everything we've been talking about. But I think that, you create chaos, you create control. There's just been some distrustful things I've heard in the media where I'm like, oh, what does that mean? Like, I don't, and that can be viewed from two different perspectives, yeah, man, there's just a whole bunch of stuff that I've just seen inconsistencies with. And it just seems like it's a dimmer switch. Like, it's not like a light just, went off and they said, no more of this. And you can't leave your home unless you give us all of your personal information. Like, it just seems like I felt like there's been a dimming of our freedoms. And so I'm hearing that contact tracing is coming. I'm hearing a vaccine is going to come out eventually. I'm hearing that these things won't be required, but you won't be able to do a lot of things if you don't get them. Just like to be so brutally honest, about, because I feel like I can just be honest with you about that post you saw when I was like, man, I know this is all under the, like, we have to do what we can to protect the vulnerable. Right. And so that comment that I made on Facebook that I know just didn't sit super well with you. Cause I was like, man, there's so many vulnerable lives that we're not fighting for in this way. We're like shutting it down. We're shutting our nation down. And I'll play along for a time, but I'm like, man, abortion clinics, and I had brought that up. They offer women's services for free. It's not always just abortion. I think the majority is, but I also know of non-abortion clinics that offer women's services. So I just had to be, man, I'm like, if this is for the vulnerable, why aren't we looking everywhere where the vulnerable exist? I get that there's a virus in front of our faces right now, so we have to deal with that. But I'm like, wow, all of a sudden we're taking these huge measures and everybody seems to be standing in solidarity over it, at least in the beginning. That it just bothered me. That language of protecting the vulnerable really deeply affected me, because I'm like, I'm not seeing the same action. I don't see that be consistent across the board. Now, granted, and I would never, to me, I'm like, this is where information varies. And so, but I'm like, okay, if 0.2% of the population is dying because of this, and it's immune compromised and elderly, and now we're finding children we're finding all of these things because we don't know a lot about it. But man, we're willing to shut it down for that. I'm not saying that one life doesn't matter. One life lost to COVID matters, it does. But the response that we've had, it has to make me question more things. And so that's what I've done. I'm peeking around the corner just to see if there's anything else going on. Because I'm like, why right now? Why this time in history? Why is this not consistent across the board? I get that it's new, but there was just too many things that raised my little and again, I say all that with I don't know everything. I don't have the answers to everything. All I know is there's something in me saying, be curious, ask questions. Mm-hmm. Don't believe everything you're hearing. Don't believe it all. So, yeah. And, just to back up, because of the abortion topic is such a sensitive topic. I would never ever want to present in a way that ever makes anyone feel, because I have friends who have had abortions in their life. And since then, when they had them, the information that was presented to them helped them make the decision. Mm-hmm. But since then, they've learned just more about it. And I just want anybody to know that would be listening to this, that I don't hate people that make that decision. That's not what I hate. I hate abortion. I don't hate people that do it, that are in a position to make that decision. I hate that for them. But I'm not about shame. I'm not about that. And so I would never want to communicate that, especially in this forum where it's like, I can't sit with a person who's listening and going, I've had an abortion. It was the best thing I ever did. How come you're telling me I shouldn't have this choice? Mm-hmm. So that really struck a chord. That pulled on my heartstrings, because I'm like, I just have to say something because this doesn't make sense to me.
Totally. So. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this totally is just something that we will never be able to, we have no point of reference for anything else like this in our lives. Right. And it's so hard to make sense of it. It is very, very disorienting to have life just all of a sudden, as we know it, be completely different and shut down. And how I've reasoned with it is that because this is new, information is going to always be changing and being updated.
Yeah.
And this virus, from what we know, little that we know of it, it is pretty brutal in the way that it operates, and it's so unpredictable. I was in Thailand in early February, and a lot of the news was going on of what was happening in China, and the news that was going on there was crazy. And hearing about just how much it was affecting the Wuhan area, and and it was hardly on our radar in the States at that point. And the only way this is happening is because this virus is actually as potentially bad as we could think it is. We don't know. And so in order to really try and understand it better, I think the only thing that makes sense is a pause. It's definitely not the perfect answer, but I don't know what could be better. I honestly don't. I wish I knew. Seeing your post really did well, serve something, but also encouraged me to go, okay, maybe like I can go, it might be a good idea to go look at other information and see like what else is out there. And yeah, I think there's constant information coming out all the time. I'm trying to look at information that is as peer-reviewed as possible, that's written by epidemiologists or by scientists or doctors. I think the information I'm seeing is that this is potentially more deadly than we think it is. And yes, there is a fear around the narratives for sure. But I think it's all done I think it's done with the best of intentions. The abortion topic, I think that deserves its own conversation.
Yeah,
for sure. Along with all the other things that are happening as a consequence of COVID, there are lots of things that are happening that are outside of our control that are happening because of shelter in place. There's always unintended positive and negative consequences, I think, of any situation. I have some friends that are potentially getting a divorce right now because they've been sheltered in place together and all these issues have come about, but we can't conveniently blame it on coronavirus either, right? Right. Those issues were probably percolating under the surface for a little bit, and it's not a perfect solution by any means at all. Yeah, the face mask thing is a challenging thing. And the way, like in San Francisco, how we've approached it, like our mayor has said, like, yes, masks, please wear them out when certain places of business. But if you see someone not wearing a mask, do not go up to them and ask them why they're not wearing a mask. Like, that's not your job. There are police walking around in like large groups and like giving people masks, and if they want, if they're not wearing masks. The idea is that a mask, sure, it's hella annoying. Trust me, I hate it. It was funny when I was traveling to Thailand. I had to do a layover in Thailand. I didn't wear a mask the whole trip. Everyone on my flight in China was wearing a mask, and I was like, "Oh, I'm fine." And like, I hate masks. I don't like rules. Right. So it's inconvenient. If it is potentially as serious as it is, I'll wear a mask for this time. I hope that this isn't for the long term. It's a lot of different emotions grappling back and forth all the time. Yeah. To your point about freedom. Yeah, I think that's an interesting conversation too. Tell me what you think about freedom, or what that means to you.
If you take in context everything I shared with you about how I see our world through a biblical lens, right? I believe to my core that there's evil. I believe there's trouble in this world because the Bible tells us that. I believe that it's just gonna get harder before it gets redeemed. So when I see what's going on in the world, I mean, we've had tornadoes here. You know about the Tennessee tornado. It's like, what happened 2020? What happened? Like what? And it just seems to be signs and wonders in the sky. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. You can look into it, if you've got some free time, but we're just seeing it's like those birth pains. And I don't know the timeline. Nobody does. But when I see what's happening and what we seem to be progressing toward, because I expect there to eventually be like a one world order, one world currency, people will hear that and go, what a quack, what a crazy lady. And that's okay. I think that if I wasn't looking through a biblical lens, I would be like, you're crazy. You're a conspiracy theorist. You're crazy. What? Like if I wasn't looking through that lens, but I do look through that lens. That's, and that lens has actually given me a lot of context for the things going on around me and the evil in the world. It's given me context for that. Because I'm like, how in the world is this real? But I think that I really do see us moving a little bit more and more toward like I'm going to be seen as a leper. Like I'm going to be seen as an unclean person who didn't get the vaccine, somehow escaped contact tracing, if that's even possible. And people are going to be warned about me. And the thing is, cuckoo as that sounds, we know that does happen in other countries. There's systems that can let you know, hey, you're in a grocery store right now, and there's somebody in the grocery store that has tested positive for COVID. So so that's something that's a real thing that we know happens. And I don't know how far away we are from that happening in our country. And so just seems like little by little, it's almost like you have the freedom to say you don't want these things, but if you don't take them, you're essentially not going to be able to buy food. Like you're not going to be able to go to this grocery store if you haven't downloaded this app that traces you and where you're going, or certain things like churches needing you to register now so that they know that you were there. You know, you can't just be off the grid anymore. So those things, again, I don't think I have all the answers. I don't claim to know this is what's happening, but it's enough for me to go, what is this? I think that the narrative is it's for our safety. It's for the safety of humanity. And something doesn't feel safe about it to me. Mm-hmm. And it's not like I'm selfish. I want my own personal freedoms. I'm afraid for you and for everybody else in this country, really around the world, but in this country, what we fought for was freedom. I'm afraid that what's going to be too far for you, someday you won't be able to say no to. And so I feel like what's coming down the road, the people who are like, just obey, like wear your mask, social distance, shelter, do all of that. Come on, because we all want to open back up, right? Like that's the narrative I'm hearing. We're doing these things so we can get there faster. My little mind feels like we're being socially conditioned. Like, what will they do? How far can we get them to obey? And so it looks like disobedience. It looks like people are going to know we're the unclean ones. Like we're the ones that didn't vaccinate. We're the ones that didn't somehow escaped contact tracing. I don't know how that would even be possible because they can trace us on our phones. Right. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. It causes me, it's enough for me to go, what is this leading to? Mm-hmm. Will I someday regret having not said anything and fought? Because I'm not about I'm fighting for freedom over loving one another. That's obviously an important biblical principle but the hard thing is I do see this as loving one another. Like I do. I see, as you said, your friends who are about to get a divorce. Like we've had to protect these vulnerable people from this virus. But if you take a panoramic view and you zoom out a little bit, what other pandemics are going on in our country? How many people who are sober are going back to alcohol? How many people are feeling totally hopeless that they're ending their life? How many marriages are ending? How much more child abuse is going on now that these kids don't have the escape of school in a safe place? What are these other things that are issues we know about, but the focus right now is on the virus and protecting each other from something that has a 0.2%, chance of death at this point? A lot of people get it. It's mild. They don't even know they have it. Some people didn't even know they had it. I have personal friends who, I'm not just making up stories. Mm-hmm. And then there are people who die of COVID related complications. So I don't want to disregard that. I don't want to take that away from anybody who's had a loved one that has passed. All death sucks. It sucks. That's why I'm thank you, Jesus, for dealing with death once and for all. We only have to die once, and it sucks. Mm-hmm. Anyway, people are leaving this earth. It sucks. Mm-hmm. It's evil. Death is evil. It was never the original intent. So, yeah. I hate that. I do. I hate it for everybody who's had a loved one that has either died of it or has had to go to the hospital for it.
Totally.
I'm sorry. I hate that. I do. Mm-hmm. I don't want to disregard that. So it's a real virus. I'm not saying it's not. I know people are getting it. I know people are being affected by it, but I don't see to put it in percentage, which I hate to diminish a life to a percentage. I hate that. But when I look at the numbers, it just doesn't make sense to me. It's made me have to ask these questions. So
the numbers for the number of people that have passed away.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Which I hate it.
The 100,000.
I hate it.
We're hearing.
Yes. I hate that. Sad for every single last one of them.
Yeah.
But like I said, the zooming out, the panoramic view, how many other lives have, and we know that those lives too, some people have gone back and been like, well, shoot. It wasn't exactly COVID. It was a heart attack. Mm-hmm. That was the actual. So there's some recounting of numbers. So we don't even know the exact number, And I don't feel like I need to know the exact number. I just need to know. And people will say, well, it was because we sheltered in place that we controlled that number, you know? And I think we're now putting our toes back in the water, dipping our toes in the water, coming out of our shelter to kind of see what happens. You know, is there going to be a resurgence? And so anyways, I don't claim to know all the answers by any means, but I do know this. I know that I need to ask questions. If I believe that, yes, there's hope, and that's found in Jesus, and yes, there's going to be trouble, and it's not going to get better, it's going to get worse, and he has an answer and redemption for that, things going on in this world make me go, is this part of that? You know, is this part of all of that ick?
I know. It would be great to have all the answers, right?
Sure would. And I mean,
would.
You know, there are some answers that we do have, but I'm slow to say that I know everything.
I think there's so many potential ways this could go. And the only thing I know to do right now is to work with the information that I have with me. Yeah. So the concept of freedom, I think that's interesting. I think freedom works when we have parameters and we have agreements in place, right? Freedom obviously isn't a free for all. And I know that's not what you're saying. Freedom isn't a free for all. There are agreements that we have to think about. And I think sometimes we have to make compromises for something bigger than ourselves, something that's outside of ourselves. And I think in my mind, at least for now, while this is a short-term solution, those are the things that we're giving up, so to speak. But we're being asked to sit at home and to wear a mask to be encouraged to wear a mask. That's all. That's the information I know right now. And like going down a path in any other regard, I don't know. I think for myself, it just doesn't feel productive. There's so much that I can be doing with this time that I want to focus on. Yeah. And freedom, I think absolutely, that's something we should think about. I think.
Do you have anything you can think of that would be enough for you to go, wait? Because right now I hear you saying, all I know to do is what I'm being asked to do with the information that I have. You know what I mean? Like, you're kind of like, this is what they're asking of us. I'll play along. Is there anything that you think would be too far for you that they could ask of you that you would say, why are you asking me to do this? Like, is there anything? I don't have an idea or an answer. I'm just wondering for you personally, will there be something that, because the government's already been able to ask us to do things like we couldn't assemble, the right to assemble. Like we were told, don't do that, what could they possibly ask of you that would be like, I'm not comfortable with that. And you don't have to answer if you don't have one, but those are things I ask,
Yeah. Yeah. I'll think about that a little bit. There's the extreme, like my parents were pulled into labor camps and had to work, in labor camps in communist China. That would be far. Right, for sure.
Yeah. I think you could really speak to that. You know a lot more about that than I do.
Yeah, Dad was pulled out of school at 14 to go work in labor camps. So then escaped to the States eventually. So I think my notion of freedom, like, sure, I don't want it to ever get to that. But I guess like government even knowing my data, I'm like, okay, sure, you can all right, you can look at what I do on my cell phone, I guess. And if that's, I don't know how that would affect me on a fundamental level yet. So those are questions that I can ask myself. And I'll think about that. I think that's a good thing to think about for sure.
Yeah. And what we do now is going to kind of allow for some of those things in the future. That's the hard part. That's why I'm like, feel like I'm kind of calling people's bluff and so to speak with all of this. Like,
what do you think their intention is at the end of the day? Well, but what could be the intention and the end game at the end of the day?
Yeah. Well, so again, the whole like Jesus comes to set things right once and for all, which is where I find my freedom. So it's in him, not this world. It's funny that I'm saying this because I'm like, ultimately, I believe it's going to get bad. And so I think it leads to a lot of things. I think it leads to like either you obey everything they ask of us, even though it's going to be request or it's not going to be mandatory. But if you don't do it, you're not going to get to do everyday things like leave your house. And
what would be the reason, you think, though?
I think that ultimately, I think they're trying to get us all under one kind of world power. And how do you get that? You get obedience, and you get everything from how you pay for things, to being tracked, to being, it's power. It's to be under a ruler that's not Jesus.
Okay. For one ultimate ruler that wants to rule over everyone, like a person.
Yeah. Like,
okay.
The Antichrist eventually, who,
gotcha. Okay.
Who knows who that might be, but I believe that there is one.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in Satan. I believe that he has free reign right now. And I think that, man, there's some just dark stuff going on that I don't know. We don't know the day or the hour. We don't know his timeline of when he's going to come back to set this all straight. But,
mm-hmm.
but the sort of things happening right now, I'm like, oh, a virus. Well, that would make sense because people are afraid of death. And if we can tell people, a lot of people this is dangerous and you're going to die if you get it, possibly, or it's going to create lifelong complications, man, that can stir up fear in you. And it's kind of like, tell me what I need to do so I don't get that,
mm-hmm.
Get a vaccine in me, give me parameters, tell everyone to stay home unless they do these things,
Mm-hmm.
I think, if you scare enough people, it kind of becomes that. And then there's just it's happening in other countries. It's just interesting to me. I'm like, okay, so we're getting all countries are suffering by staying home enough that they're going to be so sick of it and so sick of the protocols that they're going to go, just give me something easy. Is it a vaccine? I'll take it. Just give me my life back.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to get to that, and we just might. I don't know. I don't know the future of how it's all going to shake out.
Sure.
But it's been enough. It's just been enough to make me say this might be leading to something else we don't want.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. To your point about the other countries, it's interesting. Well, the ones that did take measures earlier on, a lot of them have pretty much opened back up. Like New Zealand, for example, is pretty much opened up. They had their 5th consecutive day, I think, of no COVID deaths. And so they've pretty much opened back up. And humans are pretty powerful, and I'm sure there are bigger forces potentially at play, but I'm like, I guess I'm trying to logically think about how it could be possible that all the world could come together under this one thing to coordinate something and keep it in secret like this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah, I know
nothing is impossible, but I'm just like, we humans are not that clever.
Let's hope. I just hope that I'm wrong. I hope this is so far-fetched. I hope that we can look back and be like, oh man, phew, glad that isn't what came out of it,
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's important enough to just put it on people's radar. Just kind of wait and watch and see what the next thing is they're going to ask of us to do.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's a lot of talk about upcoming elections and how to get Trump out of office. So there's been some people who believe man, this is one way to do it. There's all sorts of different theories. And will this all fizzle out after he's either in office or out of office? Who knows? Mm-hmm. So many different things floating around out there. But I don't know. I guess it just wouldn't surprise me if look at how much our world has changed in just 3 months. Who knew we could remember 5 months ago when you were traveling and hugging your friends and going out without a mask? That was just 3 months ago that we've started doing this. So what's going to happen in a year? Man, I hope in a year it looks like it did 5 months ago in our country. I hope. Mm-hmm. But if it doesn't, and we start to look like we're more under more and more protocols and more things that restrict us from life, I just feel like I would encourage everybody that is listening to this to just dig a little bit deeper and to look a little bit more around the corner as to why. Mm-hmm. Why are we all of a sudden losing something? Why can't we just go to the grocery store anymore without this app? Why do we need to get our temperature taken every time we walk into what else is coming? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I hope it just goes, I hope we control it and we move on. That'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen.
Mm. Yeah, our world could look different after this. I don't know if like our sense of normal is what we know today.
Right.
But what we knew as normal 10 years ago wasn't normal now.
What I will say too, and I think it's important to hear this, is that I know people are like, man, these conspiracy theorist people are quacks. They are so crazy. Mm-hmm. And here's what I always say. I'm like, guys, so if these theories don't come to pass, then these conspiracy theorists were wrong. And we, you know what I mean? So it's almost like no point in even debating it, because it's either going to happen or it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Like either we're headed for what I feel like we're headed for, or we're not. Mm-hmm. And I hope one day, that'd be great if we don't head that way. But I also am like, from my biblical standpoint of it not getting better before he makes, like, it just is playing out what has to play out. And it's not going to be white picket fences and flowers. And I know that sounds so hopeless, but that's why I find my hope in him. That's why I'm like, I want to cling to him, because he does make all things, he redeems it. The redemption is actually, you watch the Lord of the Rings. I mean, redemption's at the end of the story. That's where I feel like I have to look. And that's where I hope to tell people to look, because if the quackadoodle conspiracy theorists are right, that this stuff is going to happen. I would hope that would make people who were like, man, you guys are a bunch of idiots, go, shoot, what was that again? What is it that's, you know what I mean? Almost like put that in your back pocket to, if it happens, you could go, who was it that was talking about this and what did they know? Do you know what I mean? Like if these conspiracy theories are right, I want people to have a place to go and ask questions, Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like if I was watching this right now, I would be like, if I didn't have that reference, like what I would be thinking, that's crazy, Doc.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
totally.
That's for people to, look mm-hmm. at on their own. And mm-hmm. I'm like, ask more questions.
Sure. What do you feel would have been the appropriate response in terms of like how things could have been handled?
I'm going to say this. I understand there was this alarm because this virus was unknown and we quarantined for the period of time that we all were told to quarantine in our respective states and counties and all that. Mm-hmm. I am one who's like, we were made to fight viruses. Like our bodies have bumped up against viruses and bacteria forever and ever. Amen. So I don't know how much it actually, I would probably be of the camp that I don't think that it makes much of a difference. I mean, there's people who are home and wearing masks and doing all the right things and they're still getting it. So there's no, I almost feel like I'm of the camp of if we would have just let the virus run its course, people would have been fighting it and building up natural immunity to it. But that's the camp I sit in, Mm-hmm. So yeah, it probably is hard to hear that. Like this lady thinks we should have done nothing. I think we should have treated it like I personally treat any virus. Like when there's flu season, well, I believe flu season is in a season for a reason. Wintertime, we do have less vitamin D. We've got Thanksgiving and Christmas and Valentine's Day. We're eating tons of sugar that suppresses our immune system from a health coaching perspective.
Sure.
I think there are times of the year that we are a little bit more susceptible to these things, but I'm not saying if you're healthy, you won't get it. I have a friend who's a health nut who got it. So I'm not saying you don't get it, but I do think your body needs to come in contact with viruses. And, I can't even compare it to like the flu and like swine flu, all that. I can't even, because we didn't shut down for that. So if we didn't shut down, would it have just looked like it did with swine flu? I have to wonder. I don't know. I mean, there's numbers and I know there's all of that, but if I was in charge, I would have been like, guys, take care of yourselves. Wash your hands. don't cough on people, don't sneeze on people.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe keep some distance if you're out. Maybe you're not wanting to hug this person if they just had it or if someone in their family had it. Just good common sense practices is what I would have said. That's what I would have said.
There were certain measures put in place, I know, for the other viruses. I don't think to this degree because of for what they know of COVID to be as contagious as it is. Different measures.
What do you think when you say that, as contagious as it is? My friend had COVID, mm-hmm. and her son, who's super immune compromised. Like he's a miracle, just mm-hmm. honestly being alive. He's got like these two parts in his heart that don't connect, that need to connect for you to live.
Wow.
Somehow he's living.
Mm-hmm.
So she had COVID, and I mean, he was around her for a long time. Sure. He didn't get it.
Yeah. And I think that's the sneaky thing about what we're learning is that everyone reacts to it differently. And there's just no way to know, right? Yeah. So someone like an immunocompromised kid could be fine, but then also someone that's 35 and had no underlying conditions dies from it.
I know.
It is strange. It is so bizarre.
And it's supposed to be easily contagious, but I'm like, man. And my daughter Savannah was with that friend when she had COVID. She didn't know she had it. Mm-hmm. But my kiddo was with her in her house around her for a full day. And mm-hmm. she called me. She's like, I need to let you know I tested positive. Well, this was at the very beginning. This was like back in March, Yeah. So I'm like, man, if this thing, and they were all at a movie release. Cause her husband's a, filmmaker, and there's several people there that night that had it, didn't know it, but it wasn't like this huge, they actually don't go back to that night and say, man, tons of people from that night tested positive. Like mm-hmm. there was a few people that did. Yeah. And it didn't go beyond that. So I'm like, I don't know if there's as much of a rhyme and reason and as contagious as, I don't know. I mm-hmm. don't know, but mm-hmm. I do know it's a virus. I know they've been around forever and ever and ever. Mm-hmm. And I hate that that people, but even the non-immune compromised, I don't know, aren't getting it. So,
I know it, like no one really understands. It is bizarre. And like, I think I look at things like, excess death data of how what deaths have looked like at the beginning of this year as to what we expected them to be. But it just seems like there's just enough reason to step back. Mm-hmm. And I hope it's not forever. I do think, I remember my point now. I do think when things do lift, the world is going to look different. The world changes all the time. And sometimes there's an adjustment that has to be made, 10 years ago when life looked very different too. So, and we are resilient. I think we can adjust.
Yeah, we'll see. If we end up finding ourselves in a year or two from now going, man, we have less and less and less and less freedom. And the government seems to have more and more and more control. Like, again, I just feel a little bit like blindsided. Like we went from being home to like, now we have to like refer to what they're recommending and wanting to implement. So, like you said, we'll see.
More of the challenge of your post when I read it was that, to me, it was more the tone of what I read. And and I understand that's my interpretation. And a lot of the challenges that I think I mentioned before around Christianity of feeling like there is this sort of black and white approach to what is true. It was sort of reliving that experience of being like, I think that was more the harder thing I was grappling with of that.
I'm so sorry that what I posted, brought that part of things up for you. But I sincerely am sorry for that.
Oh,
it was a feisty little post, wasn't it?
It was feisty.
I don't think I had a snack yet that day.
The blood sugar was down.
My blood sugar was down because the specific thing about that post that I would take back was when I was like, I don't trust your numbers, and insert me, skipping away or something like that. I was like, well, that's not really what I would do in real life.
Sure.
Like, I don't trust you. And like, skip. Like that's kind of what I did.
Right.
Like, I retract that statement. I retract that. But continue. So that post made you feel like, man, that's what I felt before. Like the wall was just shut. Like there was a wall up. Like you can't come. I'm shutting down the conversation because
yeah, exactly. And there was like different instincts that cropped up for me. And ultimately I came to, I think having a conversation is the route I want to take. And like, let's try to build some understanding and to humanize that where you were coming from. So that's what I was really hoping to do, I think, ultimately. And I don't think there's any, between the two of us, we definitely can't arrive at this is what needs to happen and this is what's really happening, right? Like, 'cause that's not possible with any of us, with anyone really.
I'm so glad we could talk about it, because so much better to man, the last thing we need is to just, start turning on each other. And I'm like, that's not going to do anybody any good. And I'd rather have a conversation.
If we want the world to look a certain way, it's like we have to model that.
Right.
Right?
We have to participate in that. Yeah. I'm glad you didn't just shut me down and shut me out. I'm glad you were like, I contemplated whether or not to reach out, but I'm just gonna go for it. I'm glad that you knew you could do that with me, because
I appreciate you being receptive to that, because I'm sure there were thoughts going in your head around like, what is Louise's intention here?
Well, having context, I think, is so super important. And you do lose a lot of that when you read someone's post, because you have no idea if something was just said to them or they read something and they just fired away but it didn't give the full context of who they are and what they believe. And I appreciate your openness to, not laugh at other thoughts around it.
Yeah.
I do, because I think a lot of people respond that way, but to go, I don't know what, like for you to go, I don't know what's going on. Like, this is what I'm believing, because this is what I'm reading, and the, peer reviewed, you used some of those terms like I look at peer reviewed. There was a few other things that you said. And
written by epidemiologists or scientists and doctors.
Sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And those are the place, that's where you can put your trust. That's where you feel most comfortable putting your trust. And what's crazy about that is, like, I also am hearing doctor reviews and, immunologists and all of these people saying the opposite. So that's where you're like, what? You know what I mean?
People you're talking to, or is it articles?
Or interviews that, but also, yes, a physician friend that's like, man, I am not seeing it. Like in the hospital, I am not. I mean, friends who are nurses who are losing shifts because they have to be furloughed because nobody's coming in. I mean, people are afraid to go into the hospital if they don't have to. So it's created that fear too. But like physician friends actually being like, man, I just don't see it. And that's not just in Tennessee, but the point being like,
Yeah, one of my former clients is an internal medicine physician at UCSF, and I actually texted her too and was like, from your standpoint, where what is true, and she sent me a couple things to look at. So I think, to your point, I think it's important to try and find information in different places, and I'm open to looking at other information for sure. I think, just based on what I've seen and in my research, these are the things that I'm seeing. The only thing I can do is operate with the information I have and try to focus my time and energy on what I can do with this time and be inspired by those that are doing like really good things with this time and focus on that, right? And not to like Pollyanna about everything, but like I'm super inspired by lots of people that are the way they're spending their time and the way they're trying to give back. Someone that I had on my podcast, he just had a second child 3 weeks ago, but is like relaunching an online course to help people find jobs in any economic climate. He's quite a bit of thought leadership around that. And he's launching a course, even though he just had a second kid and the pandemic's happening. I'm like, I'm inspired by you. Like, how can I focus my time and be more like that? That's what I'm trying to do. I don't always, some days I just sit and cry. That's fine too, right?
Right.
There's so many things that I can focus on that are, I feel for myself, are just more productive, because otherwise I'm going to spiral.
There's a lot to sit with for sure and think about. And we've had time to be able to do that. Yeah,
that's right. It's like we have nothing but time.
I know. I mean, us reconnecting, here's one example of what wouldn't have happened otherwise, not because 100%. We don't want to, but because of life. We both care about asking some real questions and figuring out where the other one's coming from and spending time talking about that.
I mean, just personal growth, having gone through the process of figuring out how to approach this conversation and doing the research that I wanted to do to find out more information. Like that alone, I wouldn't have done that typically.
Right.
The last bit, if there's nothing else that's lingering, was to do sort of like a closing exercise, and we can take a minute to think about this. It is, so I would say, reflect back to you, your name is Alison, and then you value and care about 3 things that I observed during this conversation. And then because of this conversation, I am grateful for blank.
Yeah.
So you can take a second if we want to sit with that for a second, and then we can wrap it up with that. Okay. Do you want to go first this time?
Yeah. So I said, your name is Louise. You value and care about curiosity, playfulness, and humanity. And there's so many other little branches off of that. Thoughtfulness, caring for one another. I appreciate that you're honest and curious, again, popped up, and gentle in that. And because of this conversation, I'm really grateful that for our freedom to do this. Like, another area where I'm just grateful that we're free to do this. So
thank you for that. All right. Your name is Alison, and you value and care about asking questions, sharing the love of Jesus with others, and the freedom to make choices. I appreciate that you are open, articulate, and loving of others. Because of this conversation, I am grateful for the opportunity to participate in the world that we want to create together.
That's so sweet. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. Let's reconnect sooner than 20 years.
Agreed.
Deal.
Take care. That was part 2 of my conversation with Alison Calhoun. It was so surreal listening back on that conversation. You probably couldn't tell watching or listening to it, but my heart was beating the whole time. I feel like the whole couple weeks that led up to me preparing for the conversation and then sitting down with her was such emotional, mental space that I had never been in before. I am super grateful for having had that conversation with Alison. Alison, if you're listening to this, thank you for sitting down with me and really just sharing your time with me, and for being so open to sharing your beliefs with me. I have quite a few reflections from our conversation, and I hope that it will give all of you some food for thought. I learned that when you and another person have a very different reference point for truth, it's going to be really hard to come to a full agreement on something, and maybe that's okay. Alison has a really specific interpretation of Christianity, one that some Christians may not identify with, and I don't prescribe to Christianity. I also personally don't believe that Christianity has anything to do with COVID. So the 2 very different perspectives that Alison and I come from are naturally going to draw very different conclusions. It would make sense that we each seek out our own sources of information that align with our belief systems. Prior to our conversation, I read a lot of literature from scientists, epidemiologists, doctors, and I could have told you death toll rates, the effectiveness of masks and social distancing, but once we sat down to have a conversation, I realized that it wasn't going to be effective to talk back and forth about numbers, because she likely had her own sources that she believed to be reputable. And if we were going back and forth about numbers, it wasn't going to actually get down to the root of what we believed. And usually there's a more personal, emotional reason around our beliefs. Humans are emotional beings, after all. We're not as logical as we'd like to think. At the same time, I do wish I would have taken more time to ask clarifying questions and to really break down every statement she was saying. But when you're in the moment and having a conversation like that, it's really hard to stop and think of these things to say in the moment. If you could do that, that would be some Jedi mindset stuff. But right now, I'm really learning and growing, and that's something I hope to do better in the future. She did make me think about some things. She asked, what would be too far for me from a perspective of security and freedom. And to be honest, that's not something that I've thought all the way through before, and I didn't have a firm answer for that. It's something I should definitely think about more for myself, and I will do some more thinking about where I stand on that. So I'm really glad that she brought that up as something for me to think about. I was really glad that we spent so much time catching up and getting to know each other again. It helped me to remember all the wonderful times we shared together, and it reminded me that people are all so much more than they perceive to be on social media. When I first read her post on Facebook, I felt such a disconnect from her, from the person that I knew 20 years ago. And spending all that time catching up with her for the first part of our conversation really helped to bridge that connection again. Unfortunately, we don't all have the luxury of getting to know someone who we disagree with all the time. But hopefully this can be a reminder that we are all so much more than we present ourselves to be on social media, and that we are all so much more than the words we write on a social media post. I'm especially glad that we did the closing reflection and gratitude at the end, because that was super powerful for me and just such a great way to wrap up the conversation. This whole experience made me think about the role of play in having these kinds of conversations. There's so much polarity and divisiveness in our country right now, and I wonder if play can have a role in bringing us together, just like it helped me and Alison come together. I have been taking lots of virtual improv classes during the pandemic and learning about the principles of improv. I can definitely tell you that those improv classes helped me get through this conversation with Alison in a positive way. If you've ever heard of the concept yes and, it is about finding common ground between the person and actively listening to them, and then building upon it. While Alison and I disagree on what we think is happening with coronavirus, we can both agree that we want everyone to be happy, healthy, and loved during this time. We can both agree that we both don't know everything, and that we're just doing the best with the information that we have. Play is not just about having fun, but it's about how can we co-create something together so that we can all participate. And maybe it's a lofty idea, but I'd like to think that if more people adopted that mindset, the world could be a very different place. And just maybe that's what I'll explore more on this podcast, and more of how I will do my work moving forward. If you decide to embark on a conversation like this, here are some tips. Number 1, start off with an icebreaker just like Alison and I did. Do something that helps you to feel connected and to see the human side of each other. Number 2, before you start the conversation, make sure you set intentions and agreements. Set an intention around what you hope to accomplish with the conversation, and agreements on how you will interact with each other. Write them down and make sure you both verbally agree to them. Number 3, focus on understanding. Understanding sometimes takes digging deeper into asking more clarifying questions and to really getting to the root of where someone's beliefs are coming from. Usually there's more of a personal reason around why someone believes something the way that they do, and the more trust there is, the more you're able to get to that understanding. Number 4, be open to challenging your own beliefs. Be open to taking into consideration what the other person is sharing, because it can only help strengthen your beliefs in the end. Number 5, be aware of how you are being during the conversation. Are you actively listening, or are you being judgmental or dismissive? How you are choosing to show up in this conversation may show up so much louder than your words. You want to walk away from the conversation feeling proud of how you conducted yourself. While I can't say I was perfect and that I said everything I wish I would have said on the conversation, I am proud of myself and how I interacted with Alison. I highly, highly recommend reading the book, Breaking Through Gridlock, The Power of Conversation in a Polarized World. Reading that book gave me so much insight into preparing for this conversation, and honestly, it probably saved the conversation from going downhill. It's just a great book for communication in general, and a lot of these tips that I'm sharing can apply to any conversation in your life. I will put a link to Breaking Through Gridlock and other resources in the show notes at therecesslife.com. I'm truly grateful for having taken on this experience, and I hope that it will help you in some way. Hopefully you can learn something from my having fumbled through this conversation. Hopefully you can take away something for the next time you have a conversation with someone in your life where there may be a challenging topic or perspective that you will discuss. Alison, thank you so much for being open and willing to take part in this conversation with me. I hope that you also learned something, and if you are listening to this, I wish you well. And you, dear listener, I wish you well. If this conversation struck a chord with you in any way, I would love if you let me know on a DM through Instagram or an email or any which way, because this conversation was so eye-opening for me, and I would love to engage with more people around what you thought. If you decide to implement any of these tips in a conversation, let me know how it goes. This officially, I think, marks the end of the COVID-inspired conversations for the podcast. I believe the next episodes will be the ones that I recorded prior to coronavirus and a couple that were recorded during the pandemic as well. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't already, make sure you sign up for my email list. I'm going to be communicating with people that are signed up for the list a lot more. I want to know more about what you want to hear about. I want to hear more about what your struggles are around play, creativity, life, and how I can create more content to help with that. So go to therecesslife.com and go to subscribe, and you can sign up for the email list. You can also, of course, follow me on Instagram at therecesslife. I'm looking forward to releasing these new batch of episodes and hearing what you think. So until then, see you next time. Are you looking for more play in your life? Make sure you're subscribed to the Recess Life podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or any of the podcast platforms. You can also find the video interviews on YouTube. Don't forget to leave a review. Your feedback is so important to me, and it helps others to find the podcast. You can also follow the conversation on Instagram at therecesslife. And lastly, you can go to therecesslife.com where you'll find all the episodes and show notes on each of our guests. I hope this podcast helps you to become a little more playful today than you were yesterday. Until next time, don't forget to get out and play today.